jokes are pretty timely.
All right, folks. This is another lovely episode of the Dawn Patrol, coined by less than me. Not necessarily a podcast, not even necessarily a video cast. It's just I get the people every once in a while and they need to talk to me about interesting topics. But first I have Chris Carlson as well as Harris. We will hear in a moment. The main topic, the main news of the day, the second edition of High Tide is now out.
Hey, Peter.
Hottest titles on Wargame Vault.
Hey, Peter, you want to adjust your mic again?
Yeah.
You're breaking up again.
What is going on with this?
I don't know.
Oh, that's, I'm just... Can you hear me now?
Yes, much better.
He's gone.
He disappeared.
It's the black magic.
Me now?
You're still breaking up.
What is going on? Just give me one.
It's getting better.
Can you hear me?
I don't know if you speak loudly, you overload the mic or not. I don't think so either, but
How about now?
that's worse.
Okay, how about now?
That's better. That's better.
All right. How about now?
That's good.
Where were we? So High Tide look like the which we'll talk about some of the additions and so forth.
He's just
completely different.
Yeah, he can hear it. So. Oops, he's gone.
We lost the host. It's the curse of the goat.
StreamYard can be iffy, problematic at times. We had one time we couldn't get Larry at all. His audio just wouldn't work at all.
And I still have no idea why it didn't work just now. All I did was restart everything.
Yeah. Well,
I even checked utilities and said it was fine. And sure enough, I rebooted. And I didn't have to do a full reboot, praise be, or I'd still be waiting for it to come up.
Yeah. it's just these.
PFM.
Yes. There's that goat. We didn't sacrifice one.
Or we did, and it's mad. Like I
So are
said,
people seeing us right now, or are we still private?
No, we're public. We're so
Okay,
behave yourself.
While Peter sorts stuff out, we could talk about things,
Yeah, go ahead. We'll let Peter catch up.
You go ahead. You start talking about high tide and forms.
and Larry will just nod sagely.
High tide 2. A painful supplement.
Okay, we can start by saying it's a high tide second edition. Of high tide forms are about the two biggest things we've ever produced, and they took 4 years from long, to get done.
Yeah.
And we kept on getting smarter as we were going. I mean, we did them 20 years ago. The high tide.
High tide. Yeah, it was 2003, 2004.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been a while.
20 years of new history. 20 years of us getting smarter about that history. And as always, when we banged the rocks together, we found all kinds of stuff that needed to be fixed and updated. And that rippled back into the rest of the system. There's some new rules.
Yep.
Not a lot of new rules, though, actually. Just luckily, we're just polishing different rough spots at this point.
Well, yeah. I mean, for the most part, the Harpoon 5 rules are pretty stable at this point. But a lot of historical data that we just didn't have.
Yeah.
Like one of the scenarios I originally wrote, David and Goliath, I think it was, where, there he is.
Hey, can you hear me okay now?
Yeah.
I had to reboot. I don't know. Something was eating up the bandwidth. It's like a download that was just on amok or something. Can you hear me good now? Pretty
Yep.
Good? Right. I also bypassed my webcam. I'm going right through my laptop. All right. So sorry about that. So where were we? The high tides. When was the original release? How long has it been since the original high tide?
Yeah, we were already starting to talk about that. It was
All right, go
2003 to 2004.
Wow,
so
20.
it's only 2 decades, no big deal.
Right.
And we were, talking about lots and lots of new data, like the one of the scenarios that I wrote when we were play testing high tide way back. We kept in the game because it's a really nice game. It's a nice scenario, and the Sverdlov gets to be the bad guy. Problem is that Sosa Station in Norway doesn't exist. It's in Iceland. All the Norwegian sea arrays are monitored in Iceland, in Keflavik. So, it's like, well, the whole premise just went away, but we put in a historical note, said we're going to keep it because it's a nice scenario, but it's completely and totally FUBAR. The other one that Larry actually pulled a lot out of is our whole idea of Soviet naval strategy was bonkers. Everybody was assuming, a third battle of the Atlantic, they were going to sortie all kinds of stuff. When you actually start reading Russian historical documentation, they even admitted they didn't have the resources logistically to support such a campaign. So they were looking at defending the homeland and protecting the bastions. We took out a lot of the convoy scenarios because we left a few because they would put some effort against it, but it wouldn't be the major campaign that we had always assumed in the 80s.
Yeah. When we started reading Russian stuff, they were terrified of coming down into what they viewed as an extremely hostile environment where they were surrounded by hostile bases, and we had basically our home territory. We've actually got a document from it appeared in Naval Warfare Review of a Russian aircraft commander talking about what they were facing coming if they were going to make a trip down into the Atlantic to attack a convoy or to attack an American carrier battle group. and it's a link on our webpage. I forget which section it's under.
Probably recommended reading.
Yeah, okay, part of our recommended reading, and we do recommend reading it because it really gives you a picture of the Soviet side.
Yeah, because one of the things we found out, Peter, is that they just don't have the tanker assets. So to get a number of aircraft down, they were coming down with one missile, not two, one, which
they're-
really thinned the herd.
including their own drop
Thank
tanks.
God.
Backfires don't have drop tanks.
Oh, they don't.
On the other hand, if we go up to the Norwegian Sea,
They can carry 3.
Yeah.
Are they air-to-air refuelable as well?
Yeah, but they
Yeah.
just don't have the tanker assets.
Right.
And remember, where did those tankers belong to? Not Soviet naval aviation.
Mm.
They belong to long range aviation, and that's a strategic mission.
on the other hand, if we went up into the Norwegian Sea, we had pretty good information that long range aviation, DA, would second aircraft over to Soviet naval aviation to reinforce them. Because at that point, it becomes a strategic issue. So it isn't like there's a really solid fence between them. They've just got their own missions. So a lot of new stuff in high tide. I mean, if you've got the old one, fine. Put it aside as a historical document. But the new one is very different and I think very much worthwhile. And then high tide forms, which was Andy Doty's idea, and it turned out to be a very good one. Although it was a lot of work putting it together. So as soon as you get into forms from text, the chance of typos goes up exponentially. And we spent a lot of time polishing that particular cannonball.
Yeah.
And the thing is, high tide, the annexes in high tide cover only new material, what we call the rest of the world.
Right.
France, Italy, those ships called out in scenarios. If you want the Russian ships for high tide, the American ships for high tide, the British ships for high tide, you have to go back to the annexes we published separately. Now, if you buy the forms book, you get all the data, all the stats for all the ships that are in high tide, and you don't need to have any of those annex books.
Yeah.
So-
what I love is that you also have the Form 20s for all the aircraft. It's incredible. It's an obscene amount of information. I can't.
Only the fact that it will only appear as a PDF has saved thousands of trees. This thing is huge. It's
Right.
well over 200 pages.
Larry, we won't be the ones killing the trees. If players print them out, it's on their conscience.
Yeah.
It's on their trees.
We are enablers.
We are enablers, yes.
Right.
The thing, Peter, is that high tide forms, because of its size and the problem that Larry mentioned, actually took as much work as doing 2 supplements.
I'd say so.
So I am gratified that the sales look good right now, because if they were like the historical forms book, we'd be saying never again, because
So I'll
just the
be-
work.
So like, as a consumer, I bought the the scenarios, and then about a week later, I was like, yeah, there's no way I'm gonna do this all myself. So buyer aware, not beware, but you'll want the forums. There's just you have enough scenarios for years of play.
Yeah, I
it's
mean,
just-
bottom line is, in addition to getting the scenarios that are called out by the ships and aircraft that are called out by the high tide scenarios, you've now got the bulk of the Cold War systems that were in service in the 1980s. So you can put together as many scenarios as you want based on that.
Right, and with additional annex information for very specific countries, which are not everywhere, not in any other annex, right? So it's a good.
Yeah.
so
There's a few French ships, a few Italian, German. We've also thrown in GDR, Poland are in there, which most of it's Russian anyway, but not entirely. for all exports, if you will, that use from some of the scenarios, particularly the Baltic.
Chris, your mic's breaking up a little bit.
Oh, am I breaking up now?
Yeah.
You're good there. I don't know what happened
Full
there, but
circle
now you're
now.
good. Now you're good.
Okay. Whatever.
You're good. You're fine now. I think you were just
Okay.
in a pocket of weirdness. So what? Just we can come back to high tide, of course, but are there any other annexes in motion? How is, like, for example, I think Latin America was one that was kind of in motion.
We've got a guy working on Latin America,
Okay.
Steve Jolly. It's not slated for production because he's not ready yet. The one we'd like to do next is Japan's Self-Defense Forces,
That's awesome.
which will be a single volume,
Right.
and can obviously balance out China's Navy. And
Right.
Japan's an important player in that part of the world, so we need to get that out there. We're stepping away from Harpoon for the minute then. Chris, should I go ahead and talk about what we're doing next then?
Go for it.
By all means.
Okay. We've got this maintenance update that we're working on, and we are virtually done with it. I'm waiting for one more piece of data from one of our guys, and then I can kick out all four. These will be PDF updates of America's Navy, America's aircraft, Russia's Navy, and Russia's aircraft, and they bring those published books, which were last published several years ago, up in line with not only high tide, because we found stuff and fixed it, but also update them to current day. For instance, it lists Soviet ship losses in Ukraine. It lists the AIM-174 missile that just came into service for the U.S. That's a pretty big deal that we'll actually have an article in the sit rep about, because basically they took the top part of an SM-6 and strapped it under an F-18, and range on the order of 174 nautical miles, and of course it's networked, so you can do a lot with this thing. It's what we've needed for a long time. And then there's all the Russian guided bombs that they've used in Ukraine. A lot of other stuff. It all got poured into these we're calling a maintenance update, because really our intention was to just make it match high tide, and then we found more stuff that needed to be added. But we get that out of the way, and then we're working on Command at Sea. We're going to go back to World War II and do a 5th edition. And another, technically, you could say it's a maintenance update as well, because we're not trying to move the game forward pretty much. I think Command at Sea is a very mature system and it works very well. But we've made other minor improvements in Fear Guided Dreadnought, Harpoon, etc. We've got 4 systems to support, and Command at Sea is the last one we've looked at. And so now we're going to bring all those other minor improvements up to Command at Sea. And we're going to try and simplify some things. Chris has some, he wants to really fix the torpedo rules, which are...
Well, no, it's not the torpedo rules, it's depth charges.
Oh, depth charges. That's right.
Yeah.
The depth charge rules, which are... You don't need multiple tables. You should...
Yeah, I mean, the table thing was just to make it easy to find. But when you sit down and actually do the math, you can get away with something that's a lot simpler, that meets the requirements. Not that a lot of people play ASW scenarios anyway. They're just not high on that list. But I'm gonna back away from what Larry said. Not a minor update. I sent him 3 pages
of which I've already got half in.
Of changes that need to go in.
That's just
okay. It's going to be changes. That's why we're calling it a new edition. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's beyond just a maintenance update. I mean, there's whole sections that are being ripped out and replaced.
Yes, but players should not see anything new and terribly unfamiliar in the updates.
If they have Fear God, Dreadnought, and Harpoon, there should be no surprises.
Yeah.
If all they have is cast, they're going to be surprised. There's going to be a lot of stuff.
That's fair. That's fair. I mean, there are new rules. You will have to read the new rules, and it's necessary. And I think it'll be a better game for it.
One of the things that's going to be changing big time is visual searching by aircraft.
Interesting.
it's going to be a lot harder to find things. One of the things, because I had the opportunity to talk to Jim Swaruk, who's he hasn't published much, but he's like the number one guy on maritime patrol aircraft, particularly during World War II. And we talked extensively several years ago about visual searching and why the Japanese were so terrible. And one of the things we have, remember, we have cloud cover. You have X% looking. Well, here's the problem. If you're in an airplane and it's like 50% cloud cover and you're trying to look out around the horizon, the grazing angle turns it into 100% cover. You can't see in the holes. So this is going to force people to have to fly low, which most search aircraft did, under 2,000 feet to get underneath the cloud cover. The other thing that Jim pointed out to us is that there's a difference between surface winds and higher altitude winds. And if you go higher and you don't have a dedicated navigator who's, shooting the sun and whatnot, your location information is dubious because you don't know where the winds are pushing you. So, I mean, all these things we're trying to simplify and put in, but aircraft searching in CAS is going to get a lot harder, as it should.
Yeah, I assume navigators kind of at least attempted to compute that, right? Or at least take measurements and adjust as they went.
Yeah, they did. I mean,
yeah,
they
but of course you have no geographic references to,
navigators would look at the wave tops to figure out which way the wind was blowing and estimate wind speed. That was what they had to work with. And I've read a couple books recently. I really recommend one about the Admiral John McCain that was reviewed recently in the Naval Sitrep to find out just how horrible aircraft sighting reports were. To paraphrase the article, I think we all it's a maxim that they'll misidentify ship type, but ship count, location, direction they were sailing, and sometimes the report didn't get back at all. Any of those elements could be missing. It isn't like they didn't know what was needed, but in different circumstances. And you read the stuff that like Admiral John McCain had to work with in the South Pacific, and the time when they got a real accurate report was like 1 in 20. So
yeah, I mean, your biggest the biggest error in identification was size.
Yeah,
cruisers became battleships, destroyers became cruisers because you're looking at wakes in a lot of cases, and it's really hard to tell the difference because it's speed dependent. It's how are they sailing in regard to the seas. So the and there was also a book by Fletcher that talked about that too, didn't it, Larry?
Yep.
So we've gotten a lot between books that have been published and talking to guys who have basically made a study of search patterns. I mean, John Parshall lives near me, and I meet with John several times a year, and we talked about Japanese searching, and it's like this was kindergarten in aircraft searching. It's just they didn't do it right, and you can see they didn't even change anything from Pearl Harbor through Midway through Guadalcanal. The same sort of search patterns are being used. So it starts explaining some of the tactical surprises that showed up on the Japanese forces.
I think you've kind of hinted at this. This was from Played Aside in the YouTube chat, but any word on what might be in the October SITREP?
Okay, well, let me call it up and I'll see what I've got in there so far. I've got the draft. I've got the draft on my machine. We've got scenarios that were played at Historicon, as well as some other stuff. I've talked about an article on the AIM-174 to explain it to people. We've got some other stuff. There's an EW pod, very mysterious. It's called the ALQ 249. I think I've talked to you about this, Chris, right? I showed you the piece. And it's designed to be carried by helicopters, U.S. helicopters, and it's supposed to help defeat incoming cruise missiles. And of course, these days the threat is more drones than cruise missiles. The cruise missiles are still out there. But the Navy's been very vague, shall we say, about what its capabilities are. But it's clear that it somehow generates false targets, may jam, blind. It's network centric, as everything is these days. So it's working with its ships, EW, and maybe even other aerial EW assets to identify and confuse them. So we're going to put it out there because it's an important asset. We don't necessarily understand what it does yet. It's a chance for the players to play with some high tech.
Generalize some rulings at a scenario level, right?
Am I still doing a Sonobuoy article for you, Larry?
Yep.
Because one of the things we found out in high tide, which also works well into Harpoon, is that our layer depths have forced changes in making us having to give depths on all sonobuoys. And we've included one that, it's not just shallow, intermediate, deep. We now have one that says P. It's periscope depth, because there are a number of sonobuoys that have like 20, 25 meter depths, which could put you above a shallow layer. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that. And one of the things you're going to see in high tide is we fill in all the data on sonobuoy depths and dipping sonar depths.
Are those normally configurable as well? Are you talking more default?
Selectable.
You have mostly like default values.
2 to 3.
So you have like shallow, intermediate 2, intermediate 4, that sort of thing. Some sonobuoys you can command to go deeper, but it's limited. We had included it that you could go anywhere. Nah, it's limited.
Right.
You can't go shallow, but you can go deeper once.
Yeah, I thought it was probably a one and done, right?
Yeah.
Interesting. Any I don't know if you want to say or not, but any book reviews in the making? Any?
Yeah. We've got 3 in there already.
Okay.
Let me.
I love the book reviews in the sit reps, by the way. I think I've purchased more from those than any other advertisement anywhere. So yeah, you're doing those authors a service, but you're doing the reader a service because they're all very good books.
Let's see here. I've got a great photo. A fellow named Pat Rogies has in some. I'm looking at the draft now and flipping around. Pat Rogies is a photographer, phenomenal photographer, and he managed to get aboard USS Eisenhower while it was in the Red Sea operating against the Houthis.
Oh wow!
And so I've got a 2-page, 4-page photo spread of aircraft with a lot of drone kill markings on some of the aircraft.
Oh wow! Interesting.
And he sent me. The problem is I've only got room in the city. Pat sent me a 4-page article, a text, and about 20, 25 photos. And I'm going, sorry, I can't just do you feet. So I'm putting like 10 in the piece. They're small, but they're small. I can't make them as big as I want to make them. So it's a 1-page text, 3 pages of photos, and we're going to put the rest of them on the web page for people to see. Great. And they can They can do full screen. They can turn them into wallpapers. Copyright Pat Rogies, by the way. We always do the thing. Okay, here's what we're reviewing Fighting in the Dark, which I thought was an excellent book.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And then The Diary of Admiral Mao Tomoyagaki, which is a classic, and I just had never gotten around to reading. So I read that one. And he was all over during the Pacific War.
Well, he was Yamamoto's chief of staff.
Yeah, and so his review of his account of the loss of Yamamoto was, of course, primary source material.
Yeah.
And then there's a very good book by Tom Cooper and two other gentlemen on whose names I will not attempt to pronounce on the Iran-Iraq naval war, and it's Volume 1, Opening Blows. And what this is about is these two air forces that were not ready to fight, suddenly being in combat, and some very surprising, stuff that had to be done. There's some riverine combat in there. There's
interesting
amphibious operations as they're all trying to sort themselves out, because they were obviously in close proximity, in border with each other, and it came as sort of a surprise. So that was a very interesting book to read, and I learned a lot from it. All these are available on Amazon, of course.
And the last one Larry talked about is from Hellion, and they've got two more recent books on the air war, on the Iran-Iraq war, which updates Tom Cooper's earlier big book.
Yeah.
On that topic.
Yeah.
So those are very worthwhile to look at. The one thing about Ugagi's diary, which is really what it is, that is very frustrating, is we don't have what happened at Guadalcanal. That part is missing. So we're missing that whole discussion where Yamamoto basically said, no, we've got to go back and save the army. It's our responsibility. And how they did that, there's no discussion, which is vexing at best.
It's presumed those volumes were lost. I mean, Ugaki kept prodigious notes throughout the war.
The book is like that thick.
Yeah. By the way, it's out of print. You're going to have to look for it on eBay or somewhere, but you can find it at a reasonable price if you're patient. I saw some copies of the paperback that were listed for over $100.
Yeah.
No, wait, it will show up at much, much less than that.
And you'll have the cover in the sit rep, so you'll know what to look for.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you want to get a vision into what was going on, because Pearl Harbor is well covered, as is Midway.
The end of the war is almost depressing, because Ugaki, after he was wounded, and it wasn't a wound. He developed what disease was it he got? Something horrible.
I don't remember.
And anyways, and the account of his injuries or whatever, he was out of service for medical reasons for a while, and then came back, and they put him in charge of the Kamikaze Corps. And the last third of the book is this cycle of okay, we're going to get all these guys together, we're going to send them out, and they're going to wipe out the American fleet. Okay, that didn't work. Okay, let's get another bunch of guys together, and we'll send them out to wipe out the American fleet. And I don't know if the writing, this is his personal diary, so one presumes that he's being truthful to himself about what he's saying here, but the expectations and the belief in the results. We sank 5 carriers. We sank 3 battleships. You wonder if he believed it himself, or if he was writing it just to reinforce his own spirit.
Theories,
And at the end of the war, he actually climbed into the back seat of a plane going on a kamikaze mission.
Yeah, he refused to accept the war. So that's some of the book.
Yeah, that sounds like it's going to be a great sit rep.
There's a little bit more editing to be done. But
do we get anything for one of my favorites, Dawn of the Battleship, or Fear God Dreadnought? Or?
We got a Mike. Your Battle of Suda Bay is the lead article in that issue. So yes, I think we're going to be able to hit 3 out of the 4, if not 4 out of the 4.
Yeah, that's what I greatly appreciate y'all attending to the breadth of.
We have 4 systems. We're trying to support 4 systems.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, you get a little bit of something in every sit rep. I think very, very worthwhile.
So, anyways, to get back to what we're working on with Command at Sea, along with that, our guy in China, Chang Lei, has put together some what I think will be new history for all of us, called Birth of the PLAN, which is about a lot of surface battles and air battles that happened between the Chinese communist and the Chinese nationalist forces in the late 40s and early 50s. This is a CAS product, and actually it's it's in rough draft right now, but we're holding it because, we're going to revise and see. It'd be terrible to come out with something that wasn't compatible with the newly released fifth edition. So we're hoping to get those two books out the door at the same time.
Near each other.
And of course, once we do that, then we have to go back and do maintenance upgrades on the Fleet series.
Oh, that's going to be painful.
There will be a very specific list of things that have to be updated. We will march through that list. We'll fix those things, and then we'll get it out the door. We've just had one experience with mission creep. I don't know if we want to do that again.
What do you mean you don't know?
Well, what happens is, somebody shows up with all this great data. We go, oh, okay, I've got to put the data in. And we just want to be as accurate and as clear as possible. And it's our cross to bear.
One of the things that came up, Peter, and it also showed up on the Harpoon Facebook page, is people started discussing the nuclear surface ship propulsion plants, Ulyanovsk and Kirovs. And the U.S. Navy is listed as CONAS, okay, which is combination nuclear and steam. We're dropping that. It's nuclear. The steam part is a completely redundant system, and you can't use them because a steam plant makes saturated steam at a lower temperature and pressure, and a boiler makes superheated steam. Do I need to tell you what happens to the reactor steam generators when it's trying to fight higher temperature and higher pressure steam? It doesn't work. So we've broken it out. We said this is what it means. They're nuclear, and if they lose the nuke plant, they've got a steam plant with two boilers, KVG2 for the Kirovs and KVG4 for Ulyanovsk. So these are little things that we've been coming up with that, Peter Grining brought up, but we kind of thought we had dealt with it, but we really hadn't. And then it showed up on Facebook. So it's like, okay, yeah, we really got to do this.
Yeah. And beyond that, once we get past those two things, which we know about, we're going to work very hard on Captain's Edition 2.0.
Yep.
We have not forgotten about that. We really want to make it happen. We've just got all this other legacy and maintenance, housekeeping stuff we have to do before we can clear the decks, and then Captain's Edition.
Right. I've already shown Larry some draft combat resolution tables.
Lots of drafts.
You basically, everything is described in terms that you would see in the Harpoon 5 rules.
Mm-hmm.
You preserve the generation concept.
Mm-hmm.
All the combat systems will use a D20. So improvements will be in terms of 5%. Anything much less than that, and it's an also ran, and we don't take it into account. So, but most of the combat CRTs have been fleshed out in rough, and we'll have to see how they work when we start play testing. We're looking at things like distance and time. The distance is pretty much fixed. Time we're still working with. It will be hours, not minutes. And that means a lot of the stuff that you see in Harpoon 5 just happens. Combat solutions. Yeah, within 4 hours, within 6 hours, it happens. Move on. So a lot of the stuff that becomes critical when you're looking at seconds and minutes in a tactical sense, in a grand tactical semi-operational sense, they just don't matter.
Yeah. I mean, radar detection.
If you're in range, you're in range.
Yeah. That's all there is to it, because we're not. Well, a lot of we focused on so many little details in in the tactical game. Now, we're calling this level, by the way, Grand Tactical. The idea is that we're still dealing with a single battle group or a single. It's not an operational level game. An operational level game, you're looking at a period of days, weeks, and your concerns become more logistics and the marshaling of forces. No, this is still about fighting in a particular engagement.
Yeah, but it will be in a theater perspective. Okay, so you're going to have, say, like from just south of Iceland all the way up to Novaya Zemlya will be a quote theater. All right, and then on top of that, we're designing it. I've pretty much got it set up that you can either use a hex grid or you can use miniatures. Because we're going to use hex corners, all that means is that we turn maneuvering from turns up to 45 degrees will be turns up to 30 degrees. We don't care about advance and transfer. We don't care about acceleration.
Please.
Hours, it doesn't matter. So, but this way, people can play it on a hex grid if they want. In fact, the map I'm looking to provide is going to be a hex grid.
Is it roughly 25 nautical miles per hex or 20?
It'll be 50.
Okay.
So if you're at the center of the hex, you are radar horizon is about 25 miles.
Right.
Which for most ships, 20 to 25 is a good number. 25 is a nice and easy one as far as a divisor goes for a lot of these systems. So we're just going to go with that.
So I mean, you're really not going to get a radar fix unless you're obviously within the same hex.
That's a surface search, but
air search.
Air search, and there will be very simple rules. I mean, if you're at high, it's full. If you're medium, it's -1 hex. If you're low, it's -2 hexes.
Yep. Right.
It's really straightforward.
Yep.
It captures a lot of the tactical decisions without really getting into the nitnoids, because the one of the goals here is speed of play.
Right, absolutely. One thing I do suggest is kind of keep in mind whether or not an individual who develops a vassal for it could instantiate Fog of War further, right? So in other words, you want to just kind of maybe keep in mind that your user base might want to even increase the Fog of War.
Well, the Fog of War is going to be pretty high because what you're going to do, there is a plotting phase, is that you will have a map that you will plot your movement. But on the map board itself, the unit can be in or in any one of the adjacent 6 hexes.
Okay.
So in order to attack, the rules are going to force you to
fix.
To put in reconnaissance assets to target, not just attack and track, but to target. And so you're going to force a lot of the decisions that need to be made with Fog of War.
Okay. So it might very well be built into the system and not really have to be.
For the most part, it'll be built in, but if you're doing a vassal module, you just turn it off.
Right, sure.
And go double blind, which you can do.
Right. And we did that with captains, by the way. Kevin was able to instantiate that, interject that. Any other time periods of note that, or even slivers of time that you've wanted to cover?
Well,
what are your wish list items? Like any interwar?
Yeah, there's the big thing with interwar because we still got to do the also-rans, the non-combatants, whatever you want to call it, for Fear God Dreadnought, the U.S., Japan. Larry and I have a nice, neat list of about 14 countries we're going to have to include. And Michael here is working on a post-World War I, early World War II, a couple of supplements along the lines of war plans that are going to need a bunch of these countries, which is going to include Latin America, the ABC countries, because they actually had relatively reasonable names.
You page through Jane's
1905 to 1925 is kind of.
We're talking really early, but they've got a battleship. You know, that was the criteria. If they've got a coastal battleship, or a monitor, then they're going in the supplement.
Yeah, and some of them, because there's a lot of opportunities for scenarios like Greece. We got to put Greece in. Some of these other countries just have an armored cruiser, but they've got a big armored cruiser. So, and of course, to keep John Knuth off my backside, we'll include Sweden.
And both the two scenarios are going to follow the same thing as what we did with Mahan, where you've got one that is U.S. centric and one that is non-U.S. centric. So you'll end up having two different supplements.
Very good. Very good.
But these
I love Mahan's, by the way. It's a great book.
But these are basically in planning. Mike's got a rough outline and nothing more. And Larry and I need to do these other navies, which, so this
is all kind of post Captain's Edition 2.0.
Yeah, that's really what we're kind of looking at. Post Captain's Edition.
Something to look forward to, though. That's cool. That's good. Anything else going on as far as any talking or conferences coming up for either of you or any of you?
Well, we did Historicon, and we gave a talk on the Houthi problem. Mm-hmm. That's been posted.
Okay.
On our presentation webpage. From a military perspective, these guys are about as, they're throwing sticks. But from a political and economic perspective, they're having a very significant effect. And we talk about that. We talk about the drones, the USVs. Although Larry and I need to figure out just what's going to happen when Slick 32 SWEP 3 really gets out to the fleet. Because I have a suspicion drones are going to be fried in or out.
We can model kinetic effects very well. I feel we've got a handle on how to do that. But when it's all happening inside an electronic box, there's a lot. There's a lot of math involved if you're trying to model it accurately, and B, you need a baseline to start with. Again, the Navy's not sharing a lot of what it can do. The Navy may not know itself, because you try this stuff in combat and you're just giving away your hand. So I would suspect that there are guys in the Navy saying, "Hey, we need to get out to the fleet so we can use it against the Houthis," and everybody's going, "Are you nuts?"
So everybody
hang on to it.
Everybody's still powering up the system and walking away from it quickly.
Yeah, it's and the tech guys are over here going, "We didn't say it was completely ready, I mean, just." And
here's your lead pants. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, the first issue we have, Peter, is that there are antennas that are only on Pac Fleet ships. Mm-hmm. So, can you say ballistic missile defense?
If you want to know about how we get information, how we understand what's going on, Chris said something very important just now. Antennas. You look at the antennas on a ship. A lot of folks look at the antennas on a ship and go, "Boy, that's a lot of antennas." That's if they look at all. Chris will look at the individual antenna and go, "This is for this, this is for this, this is for this. What does this one do? I don't know what this one does."
And that bothers him.
Find out. And that's how we did data links.
I mean, remember the data link diagram I did of the Burke where I point out all the antennas? Yeah. That's how you can find out what people have. Oh, look, they've got a Link 16 antenna. Yeah. I didn't know that. They didn't say that, but that's Link 16.
Yeah. Unlike speed limit signs in Chicago, those antennas are not decorative. Okay, they're there for a reason. And when you find out you find out something about what the ship is capable of.
Here's a rules question for you. I'll make this quick. And I've seen this in several play-by-post games, but how detectable are the data links, right? Like as far as the ESM systems.
The early data links are very detectable.
Okay.
The later ones, you typically use spread spectrum. So like for the F-35, F-22, you might see them if you go between aircraft. The big problem is recognizing it as a data link. It's just kind of blah.
Yeah. Okay.
And then we now have those that are encrypted and they have jam resistance, like Link 16. The nice thing about Link 16 is it's fairly hard to detect because the long range aspect is satellite communications. It doesn't have an HF transmission mode. So you've got UHF, SHF, line of sight. You've got to be within line of sight to even have a chance of seeing it.
At that point, you probably have other means of detection, of course.
Yeah. So now, when you look at some of these passive systems like Kolchuga and others, they have a chance, but it all depends if they have a field of view, and that's when it gets really ugly, because now we become position specific, and as we all know, miniature gaming is not the most accurate when it comes time for placement of units. So you have to be kind of careful on how those work.
And then a similar question, just just cruise missiles and any of the SARH capable, radar, semi-active radar homing, like how?
Again, if you're in the line of sight,
right, line of sight, obviously, but then it's
well,
I've seen
a
lot of GMs.
You have to keep the side lobes down, otherwise the missile doesn't home.
Right.
So if you're not in the beam, you don't see it.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I mean, I've seen GMs kind of be very sticklers on showing passive detections of the radar homing. I'm like, at that point, it's too late. If the radar homing's on it's you better get the SAMs better be flying at that point.
Yeah.
You have other problems.
Yes, exactly.
The target more than likely knows it's being illuminated.
Yeah, exactly. Based on the radar that had fixed it
right,
to begin with. Right. Okay. I think we will round it off here.
Is there any other questions popping up?
No, I don't see any. Audience has been pretty 2 and 3. I think we got all of it. I think the only other question the only other statement was how carriers ever found a target, and this was one. But you covered that.
Yeah,
and we're going to be
right. I mean, if you read the book about Frank Jack Flesher, especially, launching a carrier strike was the easiest part of it. Finding the guys in the first place was 90% of the work. Once you knew where he was in a good way, there were carrier strikes that were launched, never found a thing because they were launched at bad contact. Yeah. So, yeah.
At Midway, accidentally finding a destroyer that was off on its own and then following it. I mean, really, ultimately, right?
And this is when you think, okay, you find something and you shadow it. You keep sending back position reports. It seems like there's a fairly straightforward procedure. Didn't work that way.
Yeah. Once CASC 5th comes out, I will do a SITREP article on search profiles and how to set them up. And then, basically compare the U.S., the Brits, and the Japanese, because that's what I really have the most of. And you come down going, how did the Japanese ever find anything when you look at how they do searching? Because those wedges don't overlap. Mm-hmm. There's lots of space between them.
And they were doing that just from limited resources or time? They thought that
different philosophy. Right. Recall that Japanese use float planes off ships.
Okay.
That's why they had such large float plane contingents on battleships. That's why they made the Tones having so much flight aspect. Is that was their primary search assets.
Uh,
Taking stuff off carriers was only to fill in the holes. Where on the U.S. side, our float planes really were tuned
Spotters.
to for gunnery spotting, which kind of went away once we got radars of decent range because they're more accurate than an aircraft spot.
okay. I think we'll round it off there and call it. But very good conversation. I know we didn't come into it with a lot of topics, but we always have interesting things to talk about. So thank you all, you gentlemen, for gracing us with your presence and your intelligence and your experience. All right.
Okay.
Thank you for having us.
Have a great one.
Yep. Thank you.
All right, signing off. Bye
Yep,
bye.
bye, Larry.